I never thought there would come a day when I'd sit in front of my computer, hands trembling, vision blurred, unable to believe the words appearing on the screen. In nearly 4 decades as a teacher, I've graded thousands of exams, read countless essays, but never before had opening a single email made my heart tighten like this. That morning, the autumn sun spilled gently through the window, casting soft shadows over my cup of Earl Grey, the same tea I sipped every morning. Everything felt peaceful, too peaceful, until I clicked on my inbox. The subject line was simple, almost like a routine administrative update, but to me, it felt like a slap in the face. Asset transfer confirmation complete. I read it again, and again, but no matter how many times I reread those words, they didn't change. Every word shattered in my mind. Transfer, complete, asset, confirmation, each one echoing a horrifying question I couldn't bear to face. Had I lost everything? Don't take your eyes off this story, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel right away, because what you are about to read will change the way you look at trust, about love, and about yourself. I live in a $2.3 million estate nestled in the quiet suburbs of Vermont, a 2-story mansion made entirely from imported Canadian oak with a natural stone fireplace, a walnut-paneled reading room, and a backyard garden that features a hot tub, where George and I used to sit on winter nights watching the snow fall like a silent lullaby. That house was the embodiment of a lifetime of work, his, mine, and of the American dream we built from nothing. George and I once ran a chain of artisan woodworking studios, specializing in handcrafted furniture, renowned throughout the Northeast. Our pieces were custom ordered for Boston City Hall and even some 5-star hotels in Manhattan. After George passed away 7 years ago from a stroke, I couldn't bring myself to sell the company. Though retired, I kept the majority shares, as a living memory of him. I was never one to splurge. My investment account held over $750,000, but I still liked doing my own grocery shopping, cooking breakfast every morning, and tending to the hydrangeas George planted for me. My brand new Porsche Cayenne sat unused in the garage. I preferred my morning walks, bundled in the wool cardigan he once bought from a local market. I thought I was living a full, peaceful life, but I was wrong. It all started when Andrew, my only son, began visiting more often. He'd show up in the late afternoons, always with flowers or pastries, always saying sweet things and hugging me tightly. I thought he had changed. I told myself, finally, he understands. After everything, the bond between mother and son still holds. But now, looking back, there was always something missing in his smile. It was too soft, too polished, too perfect. A kind of gentleness that felt just a little too rehearsed. A politeness that only a mother's heart could detect, yet one too weary to question. Mom, you don't need to worry about a thing anymore. I'll handle everything. You should rest. You deserve to live comfortably now. I cried that day, touched, relieved. I remember clearly how he opened his iPad, placed it in front of me, and explained the paperwork with such calmness. Just a simple power of attorney form, so I can help with little things, transfers, investments, taxes, all that complicated stuff. I signed. Or, I thought I did, because 3 weeks later, strange things began to happen. Bank statements stopped arriving at my address. My online account access was locked. I called customer service. They said I needed a new authorization form. And then, that morning, I received the email. The asset transfer was complete. I nearly fell out of my chair. I rushed to the filing cabinet in the reading room, where George and I kept all important documents, second drawer on the left. My hands were shaking as I flipped through folder after folder, until I saw it, a full power of attorney form. My name was signed, but it wasn't my signature. There was a tiny dot beneath the M in Margaret, something I used to do in my youth as a personal mark. But the handwriting was shaky, uneven, and oddly spaced. Someone had forged it, and done it well. I collapsed into the armchair, the paper still clutched in my hand like a death certificate. Not mine, but of the mother who had died the moment she trusted her son. I thought of Andrew, the little boy who once sobbed because he didn't make the basketball team, the child who used to read me poems when I couldn't sleep during the early years of menopause. I had held him through fevers, baked birthday cakes for him 18 years in a row, taken out loans to send him to private school, and now he was the one who signed away my entire life. I taught for almost 40 years. I once spotted a plagiarized essay after reading just 3 lines. I'd analyzed handwriting in student assignments to catch ghostwriting. I knew forgery when I saw it, and I knew if I wanted to live the rest of my life with dignity. I couldn't stay silent. One name flashed through my mind like a light at the end of a tunnel. Leonard Braxton. Back in 1996, I had taught Leonard in my AP literature class. A gentle boy, round glasses, and the odd habit of staying after class to ask about Shakespeare. One day, as we discussed King Lear, Leonard looked at me and said, "Ms. Margaret, if I ever become a judge, I promise I'll do right by you if anyone ever wrongs you, no matter who they are." I laughed then. I thought he was just being sweet, a child's promise. But today, I needed that promise. I opened my old address book and flipped through the faded handwritten notes from years ago. Leonard Braxton, Class 12B, now a lawyer, District Judge of Westbrook. I dialed the number. 1 ring, then 2. A mechanical female voice answered, "Hello, this is the office of Judge Leonard Braxton." I hadn't planned on leaving a message, but I did. "Leonard, this is Ms. Margaret. I need you, urgently." I sat there, in the mansion that, on paper, no longer belonged to me. I stared out the window, where red maple leaves were falling slowly to the ground like moments you can never get back. But this time, I wouldn't just sit and watch. This time, I would act. I had no more tears left to cry, no more faith left to plead. All I had left was one thing, the truth, and I would reclaim everything with my own 2 hands. I brewed a fresh pot of tea, the premium Earl Grey George once brought back from an authentic English shop in Boston during a winter business trip in 2005. I still remember him calling me from the checkout counter saying, "I found the kind of tea you said you used to drink at your grandma's house. Want me to bring back a box?" I had laughed, told him not to be silly, but George never brought just 1 box, he brought 10. Even now, the aroma was just the same, warm, delicate, that gentle bergamot citrus wrapped in woody notes, but the taste burned a little deeper in my throat. Not because of the tea, but because my hands were still shaking. Only this time, the shaking didn't come from fear. It came from fire, a slow burning flame just beneath the surface of my skin, beneath the calm exterior I'd worn like a mask. I wasn't the kind of woman who lashed out in anger. I was gentle. I knew how to step back, how to wait, but I was also someone who never forgot. I sat down at the cold gray granite dining table and opened my old leather notebook, the one where I wrote down everything: shareholder lists, investment passwords, flu shot schedules, curtain measurements for every room in the house, and small notes about former students. The ones who still sent me Lunar New Year wishes, Christmas cards, or simple notes that said, "Ms. Whitmore, I just got promoted. Thinking of you." I flipped through the pages. Each one was a slice of memory, a life not yet worn out, though no longer young, until I found it: Braxton Leonard, Class 12B, now a lawyer, District Judge, Westbrook County. The note was dated 5 years ago. The ink was still clear, the strokes neat, as if some part of me had always known I'd need it someday. I took a deep breath and dialed the number. 1 ring, 2. "Hello, this is the office of Judge Leonard Braxton," the same automated voice, polite, professional, and distant. "If you wish to schedule a private appointment, please leave a message after the tone." I hesitated. My heart pounded, not out of fear that Leonard wouldn't remember me, but because I wasn't sure I had the strength to say what I needed to say. Then I opened my mouth, and a single sentence slipped out, frail as thread, but heavy with the weight of a mother pushed to the edge of silence. "Leonard, this is Ms. Margaret Whitmore. I need to meet with you. It's urgent." I hung up and sat still. Less than 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed. I answered before the second ring. "Ms. Margaret?" A man's voice on the other end, mature, steady, but tinged with hesitation, as if he couldn't quite believe the voice that had just called was the same woman who once taught him to analyze Sylvia Plath at 17. I smiled, a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "Yes, Leonard, it's me." I heard him exhale, like he was sorting through a rush of old memories. Is everything okay?" he asked gently. And so, I told him everything, about losing access to my bank accounts, about the forged power of attorney with a signature that wasn't mine, about the heartbreak of discovering that my own son, the boy who once said "mama" as his very first word, had conspired with strangers to take it all. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I didn't dramatize. I simply let the pain speak for itself, like a flood long held back. When I finally stopped, Leonard didn't respond right away. He let out a long breath, a sound that wasn't confusion, but something closer to restrained fury. Then his voice lowered. "Send me a scanned copy of every document you have, Miss Margaret. I'm taking this on, personally." I sent everything that same evening, all the documents. The The forged contract, scanned certificates, bank emails, and a handwritten statement from my neighbor confirming I hadn't been home that day. 3 days later, I received an appointment from Leonard's office. I arrived at the Westbrook County Courthouse on a gray, overcast morning. A light mist hung in the air, soft as breath, yet heavy with unease. Leonard's office was on the 3rd floor of the old stone courthouse, with tall windows overlooking the town square. Inside, the space felt warm, dark oak paneling, soft golden lighting cascading from a high chandelier. Leonard stood to greet me with a smile I still remembered, gentle, sincere, stripped of formality. On his desk lay the file I had sent, carefully bound, color-coded tabs marking the evidence. "You're here," Leonard said. "I've read through everything." He picked up the forged contract and handed it to me. "This signature, it's clearly copied. It's an 80% match, but the pen pressure is wrong. You always tilt your M slightly to the left. This one is perfectly vertical. Whoever forged it studied your writing carefully, but still got it wrong." I nodded. He counted on me not noticing, or not noticing in time. Leonard looked at me, his gaze steady and serious. "Do you realize this isn't just financial fraud? If we can prove intent and collaboration, this is a criminal case. They brought in a fake notary and timed it for when you were away. This was planned." I met his eyes. "I have a neighbor willing to testify, and the home security cameras were still operational." "That's enough," Leonard said. "I'll sign the subpoena, but are you ready for this?" I paused for a few seconds. Then slowly I answered, "You once wrote in your senior essay, when analyzing To Kill a Mockingbird, that justice doesn't belong to the silent. I taught you that line. And now, I believe it's time I stop being silent." Leonard smiled, not a polite smile, but the smile of someone who once received a gift from a teacher, and now intended to return it with everything he had. When I stepped out of the courthouse, the wind swept up golden leaves around my feet, and the sky was still gray, but it no longer felt heavy. I walked slowly, the soles of my worn leather shoes tapping against the courthouse steps, like a quiet drumbeat rising from inside me, steady, firm, no panic, no fear. I was no longer the frail mother robbed of everything. I was Margaret Whitmore, a woman who had taught a generation to know right from wrong, and now it was time to use that very lesson, to fight for justice, for myself. One thing was clear: Andrew wouldn't go quietly. He was never the kind to give up, and the battle ahead would be far more than a property dispute. It would be a war between motherhood and greed, memory and betrayal, between a mother who lived her life for her child, and a son who had forgotten who gave him his very first chance at success. But this time, I would not back down. That evening, I returned to the estate, the place that once held the warmth of my family, of George, of years that could never return. On paper, the house no longer bore my name, but in my heart, every stone, every stair, every creak of those oak doors still whispered to me, "You are the rightful owner." I paused at the entry, where maple trees stretched into the fading gold of late autumn. George planted them in the spring of 1984, back when this land was just a patch of wild grass and our future was still just a dream. Each tree held a story. One was planted when Andrew turned 3, another when I recovered from illness. I remembered one afternoon vividly. Andrew had climbed the tallest tree to pick fruit. He was only 8, wild as the wind. He fell, broke his arm. His scream tore through the garden like a siren. I nearly collapsed from fear. I carried him all the way to the hospital, whispering through tears, "Mom's here. I'm here." And now, that very child was the one who pushed me out of this home, without a word of warning. I stepped inside. The silence was deep, so quiet I could hear the ticking of the antique clock George had given me as a wedding gift, still ticking, as if no betrayal had ever taken place. I brushed my fingers along the windowsill, the one I used to dust each morning with a silk cloth. The touch was familiar, and yet painfully distant. I opened the hidden cabinet beside the fireplace, the one where George and I kept our most precious belongings. Not gold, not jewelry, but our life's map, documents, wills, and a savings book George secretly opened for me before he passed. $120,000. Not a fortune by our overall means, but more than enough to tell me one thing. George had never stopped protecting me. Even after he was gone, I sat in silence, clutching the savings book. A strange blend of relief and heartbreak settled in my chest. Even though I still had a small financial cushion, I knew one thing with certainty. It wouldn't break my fall if Andrew kept going. He didn't just want the estate. He wanted everything. My investment accounts, my company shares, all that George and I had spent a lifetime building. That night, I didn't eat. I simply made a pot of Earl Grey, poured it into the porcelain cup engraved with our initials, M and G, and called Richard Thomas, our longtime financial advisor. George once told me, if anyone truly understands our family, it's Richard. I'm afraid I've been betrayed, I said quietly, as if the walls of the house might hear me. He paused for a moment, then his voice came through, calm, steady. Mrs. Whitmore, I'll review every business account and share transfer document, but if what you're saying is true, this might go beyond Andrew. He could be working with someone from the internal audit team. My heart pounded in my chest. You mean there's an entire network behind this? It's possible, but here's the good news. The majority shares haven't been transferred yet. He still needs your signature, and you haven't given it. That means everything can still be reversed. I lowered my head into my hands. What I felt wasn't just anger. It was clarity. Maybe I had trusted too blindly, trusted that the bond between a mother and her child could shield a heart from the weapon of greed. The next morning, I woke at 5 a.m. A light rain tapped against the windows, soft and constant. I dressed in a simple charcoal gray outfit, wrapped the silk scarf George had bought me in Milan around my neck, and stepped outside. The emergency shareholder meeting was held at the company's headquarters. When I arrived, Andrew stood at the center of the grand room, his face lit by overhead lights. He wore a custom navy suit and a Richard Mille watch on his wrist, the kind I knew he couldn't have bought through legal income. I walked in, holding a copy of the forged contract, the one with the sloppy signature that mimicked mine but failed to hide the lie. "Mom, what are you doing here?" Andrew asked, his smile faltering into something brittle. I didn't answer him. Instead, I turned to the CEO, then to each member of the board. My voice wasn't loud, but it echoed with force. "I'm Margaret Whitmore. I request this meeting be paused immediately. I have evidence of a forged contract and signs of internal power manipulation." The room fell silent, like someone had sucked the air out. One board member spoke, hesitantly. We received notice this morning from Judge Leonard Braxton's office. The matter is now under legal review." Andrew turned pale. His eyes darted around, searching for a way out. But there wasn't one. I took a step forward. My voice lowered, but each word hit like a drumbeat. "I'll let the law do its work. But before you continue this meeting with a man who forged his own mother's name to steal her assets, ask yourselves, if he can betray the woman who gave him life, what won't he do to this company?" No one spoke. I didn't need them to. I turned and walked out, not just from the meeting, but from an old chapter of my life. My back was straight, my head held high. I knew this wasn't the end. This was the declaration of war. And this time, I wasn't fighting for property. I was fighting for something far more sacred, my dignity. 2 weeks later, I officially received the court subpoena from Westbrook County, an ivory envelope sent by certified mail, stamped in red by the courthouse. I held it for a long time before opening it, not because I feared its contents, but because I understood, from this moment forward, this wasn't a family matter anymore. It was a legal battle. The hearing was set for the 6th of next month, and the presiding judge? None other than Leonard Braxton, my former student. I didn't feel relief, but I felt protected, not because I expected special treatment. Leonard was a judge, and I knew he would uphold the law, but just knowing there would be one person in that courtroom who had once looked at me with respect, who had listened when I taught about integrity and truth, that was enough to remind me that in that courtroom, someone would see the truth. I began my search for a lawyer. I didn't choose someone soft. I chose Gloria Mitchell, a woman in her 50s, petite, with eyes sharp as tempered steel. She had once been a federal prosecutor before transitioning to civil law, and she was known for winning landmark cases against major financial firms. The first time we met, Gloria looked me up and down and said bluntly, "I'm not here to ease emotions, Mrs. Whitmore. I'm here to obliterate every legal loophole your son has exploited." I didn't feel offended. On the contrary, I felt grateful for her honesty. I responded with just one sentence. "Good. I don't need comfort. I need justice." For the weeks that followed, I lived like a different version of myself. I was still me, still brewing Earl Grey at 5 a.m., still opening the kitchen windows to let the sunlight flood across the white stone countertops. But instead of reading novels like I used to, I spent hours at the desk, combing through every old email, every financial report, every digital receipt. Gloria and I worked like soldiers in a trench. Every morning at 8 a.m., she called with instructions: find the Q2 bank statement from last year, or pull security footage from the day Andrew first showed up. I followed each request without complaint, without fatigue, because I knew if I didn't stand up for myself, no one else would. One afternoon, while reviewing the external drive connected to the home's security system, I stumbled upon an audio recording. I'd never realized the system had a voice capture feature. Perhaps George had installed it years ago as an added layer of protection. In the clip, Andrew's voice came through clearly, speaking to a man I recognized as the internal auditor, the one Andrew had introduced as an independent advisor. His voice was cold, calculated. "Once we get past this stage, my mother won't come back. She's old. Easy to fool." I froze in the Italian leather armchair. My hand dropped to the side, numb. I wasn't sure what hurt more, the words or the tone. Maybe both. I had thought Andrew was lost, misguided, but those words didn't come from a confused son. They came from an architect of betrayal. I sent the recording to Gloria. Less than 5 minutes later, she called. Her voice no longer carried its usual cool detachment. "Good," she said. "Now we have emotional leverage, and if the court hears this, every one of Andrew's excuses will fall apart." The day of the hearing arrived. The Westbrook County Courthouse, its gray stone walls, Roman columns, and red-tiled roof looked from a distance like an ancient university. I stood at the entrance in a modest ash-gray knit dress, pinned with a bird-shaped brooch, my first wedding gift from George. My hand gripped a leather clutch, inside it every piece of evidence, every wound, and a quiet belief that I was walking into a new chapter of my life. Andrew arrived with his private attorney, a young man with slicked back hair, Italian leather shoes, and the arrogant confidence of someone who thought the law was a game. I once believed Andrew wasn't the flashy type, but that day, the man standing across from me wasn't the boy I had raised. He was a stranger wearing my son's face. His lawyer submitted documents, a supposed power of attorney, asset declarations, and a transcript of a so-called verbal agreement claiming I had willingly consented. They argued I was forgetful due to age, that I had signed but failed to retain the original, and that I had temporarily relinquished control. Leonard sat high above us, his expression unreadable. He didn't nod. He didn't frown. He wasn't the student who once wrote essays on justice in my classroom. He was the one holding the scales, now. Then it was Gloria's turn. When she played the audio recording, it was as if the entire courtroom had its breath stolen. Andrew's voice echoed, crisp and rehearsed, like a villain reading lines. "Once we get past this stage, my mother won't come back. She's old. Easy to fool." I lifted my gaze. I didn't look at Andrew. I looked at Leonard, and for the first time during the hearing, I saw him tilt his head, not in emotion, but in recognition. Justice had seen the truth. Andrew's attorney tried to pivot. The defendant was taken out of context. There's no clear evidence of intent to defraud. But no one was listening anymore. Leonard closed the file before him. His voice was firm, deep, but calm. After reviewing the full evidence and listening to the recording, the court finds credible signs of forgery, asset manipulation, and serious violations of personal rights. The court rules, all assets are to be returned to Mrs. Margaret Whitmore. The defendant is liable for both financial damages and emotional distress. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I simply closed my eyes, and in that moment of stillness, I heard George's voice clear in my mind, whispering, "You did it, Margaret." Andrew didn't look at me as he left the courtroom, but I looked at him, not with anger, but with the gaze of a mother who had forgiven far too much, and now chose to let go, not to let go of justice, but to release the illusion that blood ties always come with gratitude. I turned. The courthouse doors closed behind me, and in that moment, a new door opened in front of me, a life where Margaret Whitmore was no longer afraid, no longer naive, a woman renewed, awake, and finally free. I didn't return to the estate that evening, not because I was afraid, but because I needed silence, somewhere untouched by the quiet cuts of betrayal. I drove the Porsche Cayenne, yes, the one Andrew once tried to pawn off under the excuse of financial restructuring, along the winding road by Silverwood Lake. Rows of crimson trees lined the way, their leaves falling gently like old memories, beckoning me back to a version of myself I thought I'd lost, the woman who knew how to live slowly, to love without fear, to believe without needing proof. George once brought me here for our 30th anniversary. We sat on an old wooden bench beneath a tall maple tree. He made hot cocoa from a thermos and handed it to me with a mischievous smile. "You know," he said, "we don't need a mansion. When we retire, let's buy a little cottage here. Just us. Mornings by the lake, watching the fog rise. That'll be enough." I stopped at the very same bend in the road. The late autumn wind rustled the trees, carrying with it the scent of fallen leaves and something achingly familiar. I opened the car door, stepped out, and took a deep breath. No thinking, no analyzing, no regret. just breathing, just being. For the first time in months, I felt alive. Not for someone else, not for a cause, but simply for me. That night, when I opened the door to the estate, it was quiet. No flowers, no cake, no apology waiting on the table, just an empty space. But this time, it didn't frighten me. Instead, it felt like a blank page, and I was ready to write a new story on it. I walked into the dining room. The marble table felt cold beneath my fingers. The same table Andrew once wanted to replace with glass to modernize the place. I gently set down the court's ruling. Next to it, a letter I had written the night before, written in tears, with restraint and with memories I thought I had buried. A letter to Andrew. I didn't need to write it. I knew he might never read it, but I wrote it anyway, not for him, for me. It was my way of closing one door, so another could open. Andrew, I don't know if you remember, but when you were in 5th grade, you got caught stealing a picture book from that little shop near school. They called me in, said you sat quietly, not crying, just holding the book like it was something sacred. I didn't hit you. I didn't yell. I just asked, why didn't you ask me? And you answered, I thought you'd say it wasn't necessary. I've never forgotten those words. So small, yet like a blade to a mother's heart. Today, I find myself asking the same thing. Why didn't you ask? Why didn't you tell me you needed something? Why did you choose to deceive? When everything you wanted, I would have given you freely if only you had asked with honesty. I'm not angry anymore. I'm not waiting for an apology. I just want you to understand this. Trust, when it breaks, makes no sound. But once broken, it never returns the same. I won't pursue more legal action. I won't drag this into headlines. I only ask one thing. Don't come back. Not with a heart still full of entitlement and disdain. If the day ever comes when you learn to love someone unconditionally as I once loved you, only then will the door reopen. But not soon. And maybe, never. Mom. I folded the letter, placed it in an envelope, and wrote his name across it. But I didn't send it. I placed it in the safe, tucked between important documents, the savings account George left for me, the new will, and a photograph of the two of us beneath the maple trees. A quiet reminder that some stories don't need to be retold. They just need to be remembered. 1 month later, I sold the estate, not because I needed the money, because I needed to be free. I bought a penthouse in downtown Burlington, a place unburdened by memory, a space filled only with possibility. The apartment has a balcony overlooking Lake Champlain, where the morning sun dances across the water like a promise. Every day is a new beginning. I hung a portrait I painted of George above my bed. His smile was gentle, his eyes soft, watching over me not as a guardian, but as a reminder, I'm not alone. I returned to my old school, not as a teacher, but as a mentor. I began leading a free writing class for seniors. Each person brought their own story, war, divorce, grief, loneliness, but all carried one thing in common, a desire to be heard. From them, I learned something I hadn't fully understood before. Sometimes, the most valuable thing we can do is not hold on to what was lost, but to have the courage to let go, because only when you let go do you see your reflection clearly, not as someone afraid, not as someone waiting to be rescued, but as someone saving herself. I am Margaret Whitmore. I am no longer the quiet mother who silently endured. I am the woman who walked through betrayal, through loss, through the darkest nights, and found light within herself, not because of someone else, not for someone else, but because I was always worth it. And if you, the one quietly reading this, have ever been pushed out of the place you called home, if you've ever been hurt by someone you loved with all your heart, let me tell you this, you are not alone. You are not forgotten, and you, like me, deserve to begin again. I did it. You will too. Always. If my story touched something in your heart, some place that has felt pain, sacrifice, or silence, leave a comment below. I want to hear your story because we are not alone. And if you saw a piece of yourself in a mother like me, hit like on this video. It's more than a click. It's a statement. Real love is not meant to be used. Don't forget to subscribe to She Stories Margaret, where we share emotional stories about women the world thought it could forget until they stood up and made it listen. Because sometimes the strongest journey begins with one quiet moment of saying, I've had enough. This is a fictional story that is not intended to offend or target anyone. The story is created only to convey a meaningful lesson to the viewer, and all character names are completely fictional.